Donald Trump did nothing today. He wasn't publicly seen anywhere today, perhaps because his 79-year-old swollen ankles are bothering him, or maybe he just couldn't really walk or stand up very long today, something like that. Who knows? We don't know. Maybe he couldn't speak coherently today. Maybe it was one of those days. Actually, we do know about that. Donald Trump has never had a single day in his life as a politician when he could speak coherently about anything. That is a cognitive test that Donald Trump began publicly failing 14 years ago at age 65 in 2011 when he started lying about President Obama's birth certificate. The only thing on Donald Trump's public schedule today, which is to say the schedule that was made public, was a 4 p.m. thing in the Oval Office. So Donald Trump's workday was officially scheduled to begin at 4 p.m. today. And it was scheduled to last for only a few minutes, because the event on Donald Trump's schedule at 4 p.m. today was the swearing in of the Trump ambassador to the European Union, who is, of course, an unqualified rich guy who used to run fast food chains. At 4 p.m., a 4 p.m. start to the workday is something you might schedule for a 79-year-old still recovering from jet lag after crossing 4 time zones back and forth to Alaska on Friday, after Donald Trump spent the week last week saying publicly that he thought he was going to Russia. At 6:32 p.m. today, the White House released this proof-of-life photograph that appears to be Donald Trump standing deep in the background there, doing absolutely nothing, while Secretary of State Marco Rubio swears in the new ambassador.
Donald Trump took today off. No public appearances, no speeches, nothing. Maybe it was his swollen ankles, maybe just another incoherent day. But here's the thing. His silence comes at a time when distractions are piling up. And one of those distractions is the Epstein files.
Today, the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense had to share microphone time with someone with a job title who has never been given a speaking role in any previous presidency, a Deputy White House Chief of Staff. In the history of that job title, no Deputy White House Chief of Staff has ever had a speaking role at a public event where the Vice President was speaking. But today, Donald Trump humiliated his Vice President by pulling the puppet strings and making sure that his Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, spoke longer than the Vice President did in their opening remarks when they all made a clownish visit to Union Station in Washington, D.C., the iconic Amtrak railroad station through whose glass doors Jimmy Stewart first saw the Capitol Dome when he arrived in Washington in Frank Capra's classic film, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. There were no soldiers in the shot when Jimmy Stewart's character, the newly appointed Senator Jefferson Smith, arrived at Union Station. And there have never been troops at Union Station in the decades of both the 20th and 21st century that I've been arriving at and departing from Union Station in Washington, D.C. I've never once seen a crime committed there. I've never once felt even slightly at risk there. I don't know anyone who has. Before jet travel, most United States senators arrived in Washington at Union Station and departed from Washington at Union Station. One United States senator whose career crossed from the 20th century into the 21st century passed through Union Station to and from work every Senate workday of his 36-year career as a senator.
Think about that. Trump's entire official schedule boiled down to one ceremonial swearing in, handled mostly by others. Meanwhile, his vice president was humiliated when Stephen Miller, a deputy staffer, spoke longer than the vice president himself.
Today's attempt to distract from the Epstein files and how many times and in what ways Donald Trump's name appears in the Epstein files. Donald Trump's attorney general promised to release the Epstein files before she went to the White House to tell Donald Trump how many times his name appears in the Epstein files and in what ways his name appears in the Epstein files. And then suddenly, The Attorney General and the Trump FBI director changed their minds about releasing the Epstein files. Last night on this program, Congressman Robert Garcia made news by revealing that in the secret testimony Monday to the House Oversight Committee, former Trump Attorney General William Barr said it is fully within the power of the current Attorney General to release every word of the Epstein files.
He indicated that the current Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has it within her power to release those files right now. And so we're once again saying she should release the entire files. And this idea that she's going to roll out some of it on Friday and then continue this kind of planned stage rollout is not acceptable.
Troops standing guard at Union Station, doing absolutely nothing. J.D. Vance showing up with Shake Shack burgers like this was some campaign photo op. But let's not miss the point. This was a staged distraction from something much bigger, the Epstein files.
Today, a federal judge pointed to the Epstein files when the judge rejected the Trump Justice Department request to release the grand jury transcripts in the investigation of Jeffrey Epstein. The judge made it clear that the grand jury transcripts do not include any witnesses other than an FBI agent who summarized the information that they had obtained from witnesses and documents in their investigation of the case. That was enough to get an indictment of Jeffrey Epstein for his sex trafficking and raping children. Today, in his decision, Judge Richard Berman wrote, "A significant and compelling reason to reject the government's position in this litigation is that the government has already undertaken a comprehensive investigation into the Epstein case and, not surprisingly, has assembled a trove of Epstein documents, interviews, and exhibits, and the government committed that it would share its Epstein investigation materials with the public. The government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files and materials dwarf the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials. The government is the logical party to make comprehensive disclosure to the public of the Epstein files. By comparison, the grand jury motion appears to be a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files in the government's possession. And so there is a federal judge saying in writing today that the legal maneuver that Donald Trump personally announced on social media of asking for the release of the grand jury testimony was nothing but, in the judge's words, a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files. That's what we said it was on this program the night Donald Trump said that they should release the grand jury transcripts. We said that was just a Trump diversion. Tonight, a federal judge has found that Donald Trump and his attorney general were just playing their diversion game by asking for the grand jury transcripts. That is exactly how we labeled that request for the grand jury transcripts that very night when Donald Trump announced it. The judge wrote, in February 2025, the government, as noted, was prepared to release their Epstein files to the public. But then, on July 6, 2025, the government announced it would not make the files available to the public. The information contained in the Epstein grand jury transcripts pales in comparison to the Epstein investigation information and materials in the hands of the Department of Justice. The judge wrote about something that Donald Trump and the Attorney General obviously care nothing about, because the Justice Department made no effort to even consult with Jeffrey Epstein's victims before requesting the release of the grand jury transcripts. And it is required by law that they consult with those victims before asking to release the grand jury transcripts. And Donald Trump's Justice Department did not do that. The judge wrote, there is another compelling reason not to unseal the Epstein grand jury materials at this time, namely possible threats to victims' safety and privacy. The court received a very compelling letter dated August 5th, 2025, from 3 leading victims' rights attorneys who have stated any disclosure of grand jury material, especially material that could expose or help identify victims in any way, directly affects the fairness, privacy, conferral, and protection guarantees.
So why the delay? Why stall the release? Why tease out a drip-drip rollout instead of just letting the public see everything. The judge today made it crystal clear. Trump's so-called grand jury release stunt was nothing but a diversion. And there it is, a federal judge confirming what's been obvious all along. Trump doesn't want the Epstein files out because they might show just how many times his name appears and in what ways. So, the troops at Union Station, the photo ops, the distractions, all smoke and mirrors. The real story is still locked away in those files, and the pressure to release them is only growing.